All right, today I'm going to talk about the Sony 24-50G, and should you get this lens or should you get a prime or a couple of primes? I'll be looking at the optics to do a brief comparison with the 24G Master, 24G 50G, and the old school classic, the 35ZA. And do I own these? Am I a loser that collects gear? That's debatable. I do own these lenses, and so I have my own preferences. And you should know that on this channel, I also love zooms. I also love zooms a lot. I have a lot of zooms, and I have a lot of primes because I do not discriminate. I love these lenses. Anyhow, let's get started with the bokeh. We're going to compare the 24-50G to all these other lenses wide open, starting with the 24G Master. And the apparent difference here is the field of view. It looks quite a bit different. I can't explain why. I don't pretend to know everything. I'm not your wife. G Master is all about that silky smooth bokeh, and here's the difference. I mean, that's what you're getting with the G Master. The exposure is a bit funky because I didn't have a ND filter, and it was overexposing. Next up is the 24-50G compared to the 24G. This should be quite close. I mean, they are both f2.8. There's no real difference except for the vignette, which you can see is worse on the G, the compact G that is. And aside from that, I mean, they are similar. I can't tell much of a difference. Next up is a 24-50G compared to the 35ZA, both at 35mm f2.8. This is an older lens, and it does have a little bit more vignetting, that prime that is, and it is small, and that's probably why it has a vignette issue. As for bokeh, is there much of a difference here? Can y'all tell a difference? This is zoomed in, and they look fairly close to each other. All right, next up is going to be the 24-50G at 50 compared to the 50 compact G. And the compact G is at 2.5. However, I couldn't tell much of a difference because it's only a third stop of a difference at best. It does seem to be more magnified on the 50G, but that could be an issue with the focus breathing of the 24-50G. That's just my guess. Next up, I want to briefly touch on sharpness. Is the 24-50G a prime killer? Well, first off, we're going to do the most unfairest comparison. We have the 24G Master. It is f1.4 compared to the 2.8 of the 24-50G. You know, at 24mm wide open, this 1.4 is overexposed, and the reason for that is because I can't put ND filters on, and that will just make the comparison unfair. And so beyond that, it is going to be overexposed, and it is a little bit softer because it's f1.4. It does have detail. It's not going to be bad. f1.4 is plenty usable in my opinion. It's good even. All right, the detail of the G Master go all the way to the edge, and so do the 24-50 at f2.8. However, they both are going to degrade at the far edges. This is the G Master right here. You can see it degrades more than the 24-50G wide open, and when you get to the far corners, you know, both are going to degrade. You know, the G is marginally better, but yeah, so this is on 60 megapixels. It's going to be taxing. It is what it is. And if we go to f2 for the G Master, then it surpasses the G at f2 already compared to f2.8. And I mean, it's a G Master. It's going to be tough to beat this. And if you notice, I only compared two apertures, and to get moving more quickly, I have the 24-50 f2.8 compared to the 24 compact G. Yes, the 24 compact G can hang with the G zoom. I say that wide open, the 24 to 50 zoom is better. Both of them are wide open at f2.8. And as you move along, they're both relatively good from the mid frame all the way to here. Okay, 100% 60 megapixel camera, A7CR. And they do start to degrade towards the edges, the far corners. We're all the way here. It's kind of ridiculous, but if people want to see it. Okay, there we go. We have the 24 to 50 zoom is exceeding the prime. Okay, it is a single prime killer at f2.8. Will it hold up when you stop down? Let's try it. This is at f5.6, the peak of the compact G, and it doesn't, it's going to get a little bit better. Yeah, so it definitely improves, but even then, it's just not as good as the zoom. And the zoom improves even more once stopped down to f5.6. So the zoom at 24 is a little bit better than the 24 compact G. Next up, we have two 35 millimeters. Well, the zoom is at 35 f2.8, and we have a prime, the 35ZA, old school f2.8 prime. This is a absolute tiny lens in the center. They are comparable towards the edges. They're both okay, far corners, and that is where the prime takes an advantage. And it is noticeable. The advantage is definitely there. There's some sort of softening going on both of them, but still, the prime has a tiny little bit more detail. Okay, so we'll stop down both of them now, and I can tell you that the ZA is really sharp, stop down. And here it is. The ZA is just on a different league. It is a good bit sharper. And so unfortunately for the zoom, it does not beat the prime here. Yeah, this tree detail on the ZA is just much more clear. 35 and 24 is not the most strong point of the zoom on the corners, but anywhere reasonable. Like if you're just going in just a little bit, okay, the lens is quite good. It's not bad at all. But other than that, victory for the 35ZA, tiny little prime. Next up, the zoom is at 50 f2.8. The prime is at 50 f2.5. And this is the sharpest of the zoom at 50 millimeters. And it is a little bit sharper than the prime wide open. And does it maintain that sharpness advantage to the edge? Not really. This is where they equal up towards the mid frame, and at the edge, I'd say the 2.5 might have a little advantage here. It is extremely close. So now we'll stop down. Both of them are at f2.8, and yeah, the prime is a little bit better. The mid frame is still close, very, very close. The center is probably a wash. Both of them are strong. The zoom is even a little bit better in the center, but realistically, both are extremely strong. And the max aperture, let's try it out, 5.6. Both are pin sharp. Mid frame, more of the same. You just check out how really sharp this stuff is. The seats in the stands and the fencing, both of them are really good at this point. The far corners, you'd be hard pressed to tell them apart. Sure, the prime might be a tad sharper here, but the zoom is probably a tad sharper in the center, and but it's really difficult to tell even on 60 megapixels. Okay, so stop down, we're gonna see 60 megapixels. This is 100%. This is the max. Well, this is stop down. The zoom is a little bit better in the center. It's a hair better, and even the mid. If we're going to go to far corners, all right, fine. The prime wins in the far corners, just by a smidge. But realistically, you're going to get very similar image quality from the zoom at at 50 millimeters versus the pancake. Well, it's not even a pancake. The compact prime. And you can see that the zoom right here, it just depends on where in the frame. It's just a little bit better. Towards the far corners, it's the prime. And towards the center is the zoom. I know what I would choose, the center, of course, because that's where the prominent focus is going to be most of the time, all the time. But realistically, they're both great at 50 millimeters. Okay, as you can see, the differences between the zooms and primes, they're not all that different. And they shouldn't be because they're slower aperture. They're not slow, they're just moderate apertures all the way around, except for the G Master. That is a total kick-ass lens. But that is aside from the point. When you're getting one or the other, you have to factor in price. You get a lot of primes, they're going to add up. Like the Compact G, they're like a little bit more than half price of the 24 to 50 G zoom. So the zoom is $1,100. The Compact Gs cost $600 a piece. You get two Compact Gs and you're over the price of the zoom already. So just bear with that consideration. Although when you're sourcing these smaller kits, you don't have to stay with whatever I'm using. There's more options, and I'll get back to that in a little bit later. Okay, so aside from that is the size. Okay, when you're holding the 24 to 50 zoom, it's the same size as the 24 G Master. These are larger lenses. They're not quite as large as the DSLR days, and a lot has progressed over time, but they are still relatively large. And if you're using a smaller body like a C level body, it fits okay, but it's on the side of the larger end of the size, larger end of the spectrum. And so size is a definite consideration, especially if you're only using one lens at a time. What you have in your hand is a much smaller footprint with just a prime, a smaller, slower prime. But you may be thinking, okay, that maximum aperture, it used to be a time where you would use like f2 lenses or f1.8, f1.4, f1.2. Having the larger aperture can make a big difference, and you can maybe split the difference with the aperture and crop in post, or you could get the widest end and then crop all the way through. However, if you get a G Master, the 24 G Master, it's sharper, but if you crop all the way to 50, it won't be able to handle that resolution, especially considering how strong the 24 to 50 zoom is. The zoom, you can go to 50 and you can crop to 100. See, you won't have enough pixels to crop the G Master from 24 to 100. I mean, you can if you do like a 1-to-1 crop, but it's not going to look that great. With the zoom at 50, you crop to 100, and that's the same degradation as a 24 G Master crop to 50. You see what I'm saying? It's an endless loop, so you just don't really want to think about cropping unless you really want to keep the size down, or you want something about the G Master that 24 is your primary, and then you occasionally crop to 50. So that is the deal with that. And the G Master will probably match. It's just that, do you really want to do all that excessive cropping? So next I want to talk about is low light performance. There's not going to be any difference. These are virtually the same. However, your camera, if it's a modern camera, and even if it's not that modern, cameras haven't increased in low light sensitivity for a long time. And that's not a big of an issue because they perform well in low light. They've performed well in low light since the A7 III days. That lens, that camera, even the A7R II, the low light was always good. It's just once you hit the higher ISOs, that's when your color degradation matters more than the actual noise. The color degradation is another thing I want to talk about. Is when you're using a prime versus a zoom. See, with the compact Gs, they are small. You're going to want to use it a lot because it's small and convenient to use. And this is going to make you zoom with your feet. And zoom with your feet is not really the same as zooming either. You're changing perspective. However, you're also training yourself to compose a certain way. Your style is going to change. You are going to use this lens for a long time. It could be days, could be weeks or months. And then you start to train yourself very well with this certain composition. And it's a great training exercise. And so you can do the same exercise with the zoom. It's just that you're going to feel kind of awkward to do that because at 24 millimeters, the zoom is just at its largest size, right? So it's at 24 f2.8. It's just so much larger than how the 24G is at 24. And at the smallest end, 50, it's still a bigger, more cumbersome lens to use, but it might be inside of your threshold. So that's when you're training yourself with a prime, you really know that composition. You're going to know in advance, okay, if something is happening, you know in advance where you have to be. You know in advance if you can even create something because you're so familiar with the focal length. You know your problems as soon as before it even exists. Like if you're going into a tight restaurant or a tight bar, 50 millimeter might be close, but it might be something that you want your photos to look like. You want to have the subjects in a certain manner, like an intimate scene, as compared to like a wider scene where it's 24, you just want to show off more of the background, show off more of the environment. So that's the thing that comes with training your composition. It's neither here nor there. I mean, if you're really experienced, then you already know that you're going to have to move your feet. You already know that perspective distortion is going to matter, and you can adjust that. And that's what makes the zoom so convenient, is that you can do all of this. You can move. You don't have to move. You can zoom in. But the downside is, of course, it is a larger lens. The multiple focal lengths in a body. So that is your convenience factor, and it's your crush at the same time. That means that you have a lot more flexibility. And if you think in that certain sort of way, it becomes a complex tool. It doesn't have to be, but it becomes a complex tool in that it's not as simple. You don't know it like the back of your hand, because even if you're really good with primes, like say if you shot 35 for a year or 2 years, and you're going to go to 24 for a year, and then you go to 50 for a year, and then you switch to zooms, you're going to find out that you're going to be zooming in and out for a while, and it becomes like you forget like the perspective. You forget your distance management. It's not going to be as intuitive as if you were forced to have a certain perspective, and it doesn't come natural. Let's just say that. And it takes some time to remember that moving your feet is a necessary thing. It takes time to know that sometimes you have to zoom in. It's necessary to do that as well. So the compact G, the zooms, the primes, which would you choose? And it just depends how casual you want to be, or how focused on photography or video you want to be. If you want to capture every scenario all the time, then get the zoom. It's just that simple. It's going to be much more versatile, and it's going to cost less. You're not going to have as many focal lengths. However, when you get the primes, the advantage there is that you don't have to get the 24G or the 50G. With primes, you can go with the 17 and a 35. You could go with an 18 and 90. And this is the Sony system we're talking about. While you can't cut your zooms as well, there's not as many offerings. The zoom offerings are getting kind of outrageous too. It's like trying to choose your gender. Bruh. there's just so many options. And Tamron has their own set of 17 to 75, and Sigma has their own set from 16 to 70, and Sony has their set from 16 to 50. And on top of that, there's other lenses in the kit too, like the Tamron 17 to 50. There's, of course, the staple lenses like 16 to 35 G Master 2, 24 to 70 G Master 2. So it all becomes so difficult to choose. Anyhow, that's all I got for this video. The Sony system can be confusing. Choosing can be confusing, but now you have options. You have probably too many options, but you do have options, and that is the brute force method that Sony chooses to deal with. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one. Take care.